Brian Dugan was a serial killer. He was born in 1956 in Nashua, New Hampshire. The moment he was born, it was fraught with problems. As his mother was in labour, a nurse and an intern pushed Brian's head back into the birth canal, all because a doctor hadn't arrived yet. This was fraught with problems. He suffered from headaches and vomiting as a child. It was also noted he suffered bedwetting throughout his childhood. At 8 years old, along with his brother, he set fire to the family garage. In 1967, they moved from New Hampshire to Lisle in Illinois. He started killing animals at 13, one of which he lit a cat on fire. At age 16, he was arrested for burglary and sent to a youth home, where he was molested. When he got out, he also tried to molest his brother. 16 years old, Brian Dugan also claimed that he was at a grocery store when a guy picked him up with an offer of a job. He got taken to a remote area where he was forced to perform oral sex. And then he was dropped back off at the grocery store. At this point, Brian didn't know who his attacker was, until he identified the serial killer, John Wayne Gacy, as his attacker, as he was being arrested at the time. At 18 years old, he tried to abduct a 10-year-old girl at a train station. Luckily, he was unsuccessful. By 19, he threatened to kill his sister and chop his nephew up. In 1979 to 1982, he went to Maynard Correctional Facility, where he was also raped. In 1983, this is when he committed his first murder. On the 25th of February 1983, Janine Nicarico was a 10-year-old girl who lived in Naperville and went to Elmwood Elementary. She loved animals, and one of her hobbies was horse riding. On the 25th of February, Janine stayed home due to feeling unwell. Both Janine's parents worked, and her older sisters, Chris and Kathy, went to school. At lunchtime, Patricia came home to check up on Janine and made a quick lunch for her before going back to work. At 1:30, Patricia rang Janine and spoke to her. At around 3 p.m, Patricia received a call from one of the neighbours. She told her that when her daughter Kathy came home, that the door was ajar and that there was no sign of Janine. It looked like someone had kicked in the front door from a muddy boot print left behind. Patricia quickly called her husband to come home, and the police were called. A search happened immediately. 2 days after Janine went missing, her body was found by 2 hikers just outside of Naperville. She'd been raped and beaten with a blunt object. When police talked to the neighbours, some were reported seeing a strange man. He was described as white, 25 to 30, wearing wide-rimmed glasses. But the description didn't lead to any suspects. After a few weeks, the Nicaricos offered a $10,000 reward for tips leading to an arrest. During this time, a gang member from Aurora, Illinois, it was a 20-year-old Rolando Cruz, fed false information about 2 other people, Alexandro Hernandez and Stephen Buckley, to the police, linking the 2 men to Janine's murder. This was an attempt to get the reward money. Despite a lack of evidence against these men, Rolando Cruz, Alexandro Hernandez and Stephen Buckley were indicted in March 1984. In February 1985, Cruz and Hernandez were convicted, but the jury deadlocked on Buckley. A month later, Cruz and Hernandez were sentenced to death. So all the while, the police and courts focused on the 3 men. The real killer of Janine was still around, free to do as he pleased, and that's exactly what he did. It was the 15th of July 1984. Dugan saw Donna Schnorr, a 27-year-old nurse from Geneva, Illinois. She was in her car at a stoplight when Brian Dugan locked in on his next target. He ran Donna off the road and started beating her. He then took her and raped her and then drowned her in a quarry. May the 6th, North Aurora, Brian Dugan abducts and rapes a 21-year-old female, Sharon Grajek. He was 29 years old at the time. And 3 weeks later, he makes another attempt of abduction with a woman walking along the road. She survives. The next day, he abducts and rapes a 16-year-old in the same area. On June 2nd, 1985, 2 little girls were riding their bikes in Summernok, Illinois. They were 7-year-old Melissa Ackerman and 8-year-old Opal Horton. Brian Dugan saw these 2 children riding their bikes when he grabbed Opal and dragged her into the car. Whilst he also went to grab Melissa to get her into the car, Opal had got out and ran away. When police got a good description of the perpetrator and the vehicle from Opal, they arrested Brian Dugan the next day, on the 3rd of June. This was due to a police officer recognising the description after he had already stopped Brian Dugan about his out-of-date sticker on his car. Melissa Ackerman wasn't found until a couple of weeks later. She'd been raped and drowned in a creek 17 miles away. Due to the vigilance of an 8-year-old Opal, who gave a great description, Brian Dugan was finally caught. Whilst Brian was in prison and being tried for the murders of Melissa Ackerman and Donna Schnorr, he confessed to Janine's murder in 1983, in a bargaining plea to have the charges taken down to life imprisonment. In 1987, Stephen Buckley's charges were dismissed. In 1988, Cruz and Hernandez were retried due to the public pressure to pursue Brian Dugan's confession, but Cruz was still convicted in 1990. Hernandez's second trial ended in a hung jury. After Hernandez's third trial, he was sentenced to 80 years in prison in May 1991. In 1994, Cruz was ordered a third trial and was acquitted on 19th of November 1995, and charges against Hernandez were dismissed in December 1995. Finally, in November 2005, Brian Dugan was indicted for Janine Nicarico's murder. He pleaded guilty of kidnapping, rape and murder on Janine Nicarico on July 22nd, 2009. And then on November the 11th, 2009, Brian Dugan was sentenced to death. The execution date would be the 25th of February 2010.